Marta Harper was bleeding through her plain brown dress when the third bride ran from Jesse Guthrie's ranch, crying that no woman could live beside a man who stared at sorrow and said nothing. Dust swallowed the wagon while townspeople watched from the road, and Jesse stood by the broken gate with his hat in his hands, silent as judgment. Marta had only come as the cook, poor, plain, injured, and unwanted by every respectable kitchen in town. But when she saw Jesse's scarred fingers close around a child's lost ribbon, she understood this ranch held grief, not cruelty. Pain burned up her leg, yet she lifted her chin and stayed. Before we ride into this story, let me know what country you are watching from. Comment your country below, and subscribe if you love emotional cowboy stories about shame, rescue, forgiveness, and second chances. The bride's veil caught on a mesquite thorn as she ran. It tore loose and hung there, white and trembling in the prairie wind, while Miss Cora Bell from St. Louis climbed into the supply wagon and begged the driver to turn back toward Bellwether Crossing. Her cheeks were streaked with dust and tears. Her trunk had not even been carried into the Guthrie house. Her wedding gloves were still folded in tissue paper, yet she clutched the wagon rail as if Jesse Guthrie's ranch were a burning building behind her. "I will not marry him," she cried. "I will not sleep under that roof with a man who never answers when spoken to. I'd sooner scrub floors in town." No one moved at first. The ranch hands stood along the fence line with their hats low. The old housekeeper, Mrs. Pike, pressed her lips together as if the whole scene tasted bitter. Little Ruthie Guthrie, Jesse's 9-year-old niece, stood on the porch steps with a blue ribbon in her hair and a bunch of wildflowers wilting in her small fist. She had picked them for the new bride. Jesse Guthrie stood near the gate. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and sun-browned from years in the saddle, but he carried his stillness like a wall. His black hat shadowed a lean face marked by hard work and old fire. A pale scar ran along the side of his throat and disappeared under his collar. His right hand, the one resting against the gatepost, was rough and twisted along the knuckles, as though flame had once tried to close it forever. He did not plead. He did not explain. He only watched the wagon roll away. Marta Harper had seen men take shame with fists, curses, or whiskey. Jesse Guthrie took it in silence. She stood near the back steps with a flour sack in one hand and a throb in her left leg so fierce it made the world brighten at the edges. She had come to the Bar G Ranch that morning in the hired freight wagon, brought by the storekeeper with flour, beans, coffee, lamp oil, and a letter from the hotel in town saying she was no longer needed there. Her injury had made her too slow. Her plain face and poor dress had made her easy to dismiss. A cook who limped could be replaced. A woman without kin could be told to leave with no one to complain for her. The accident had happened 2 days before, when the kitchen shelf at the Bellwether Hotel collapsed. A pot of boiling stew had struck the floor, and Marta had slipped in it while trying to save the bread. The burn down her shin was bandaged, but badly. The bruise beneath it had turned dark as storm clouds. Mrs. Bell had paid her half wages and told her she might find work washing for bachelors once she healed. But Marta had no place to heal. So when the storekeeper said Mrs. Pike at the Guthrie Ranch needed help feeding 20 hands through Roundup, Marta climbed into the freight wagon and swallowed her pride. Now the new bride was gone. The yard was full of shame, and Marta was standing in the dust with blood soaking through her bandage. The driver cracked the reins. The wagon lurched. Ruthie's ribbon slipped from her hair and fell into the dirt. The child stared after the runaway bride with a look Marta knew too well. It was the look of someone learning they were not enough to make another person stay. Jesse bent slowly and picked up the ribbon. His burned fingers closed around it. For the first time, something moved in his face, not anger, not surprise, something deeper and more private, pain. Marta looked away because she had no right to witness it. But Mrs. Pike saw her wavering on her injured leg and snapped, "You there, cook? If you mean to faint, do it away from the steps." We've had enough spectacle for one morning. A few of the hands turned. One of them, a red-haired young man named Silas, winced at the cruelty of it, but no one corrected the housekeeper. Marta steadied herself on the flour sack. "I'm not fainting." Mrs. Pike's eyes traveled over her mended dress, her worn shoes, her pale mouth, and the bandage showing beneath the torn hem. "You won't last here," she said. "None of them do." Marta knew she did not mean cooks. She meant women. Bellwether Crossing had talked of little else for months. Jesse Guthrie, heir to the bargee, needed a wife before the first hard frost. His father's will said the ranch would remain whole only if Jesse settled a household and raised Ruthie under the Guthrie name. If not, the South Range would pass to his cousin Caleb, a smooth-talking man who owned more debts than cattle and more charm than decency. 3 brides had come west. 3 had fled. The first had refused to marry a man who did not speak at supper. The second had left after one night, claiming the house was haunted by the smell of smoke. The third had not lasted long enough to remove her traveling hat, and the town had decided Jesse Guthrie must be the trouble. Silent men made people nervous. Scarred men made them invent stories. Rich, lonely men made them cruel. "Maybe the next one will be deaf," someone from the wagon road muttered. A few hands laughed under their breath. Jesse heard. Marta saw that he heard. His jaw tightened once, then eased. He tucked Ruthie's ribbon into his vest pocket as if it were something precious. Marta's leg buckled. The flour sack slipped. Before she could strike the ground, Jesse crossed the yard and caught her by the arms. His grip was careful, not possessive. He did not hold her longer than needed. Still, the strength in his hands and the quiet steadiness of him made Marta's breath catch. She expected embarrassment. She expected someone to laugh and say the lame cook was already making trouble. Jesse only looked down at the blood on her dress. Then he looked toward Mrs. Pike. "Kitchen," he said. His voice was rough, low, and strained, as though every word scraped its way out of an old wound. Mrs. Pike stiffened. "Mr. Guthrie, she is hardly fit to stand, much less cook." Jesse's gaze did not move. "Kitchen," one word, but it carried the weight of an order. Silas hurried forward and took the flour sack. Ruthie came down the steps slowly, still staring at Marta with wide, solemn eyes. "Are you dying?" the child asked. "No," Marta said, though pain made her smile tremble. "I've burned enough biscuits in my life to know dying smells worse." No one laughed, but Ruthie's lips softened. Jesse offered his arm. Marta hesitated. Pride, thin and stubborn, rose inside her. She did not want to be carried like a burden through the yard where a bride had just run. She did not want to be one more woman pitied at Jesse Guthrie's gate. "I can walk," she said. Jesse nodded once. Then he slowed his stride to match her limp. That was the first kindness. Not the arm he offered, not the command that she be taken inside. The kindness was that he did not make a show of helping her. He walked beside her as if her pace were the right pace for the whole ranch. Marta entered the Guthrie house through the back door, and the smell of it struck her first. Cold ashes, old cedar, soap, dust, and something lonely. The kitchen was large, with a black iron stove, a long work table, and windows looking out toward the windmill. Copper pots hung along one wall, polished but unused. The pantry shelves were stocked. The water bucket was full, yet the room felt as if it had been waiting years for someone to make it warm. Mrs. Pike pointed to a chair. "Sit before you bleed on my floor." Marta sat because she had no strength left for pride. Jesse stood in the doorway. For a moment, he seemed too large for the room, too burdened by the silence that followed him. Ruthie remained behind him, half hidden by his coat. Marta looked at the stove, then at the bread box, then at the basket of withered apples near the window. "Have the men eaten dinner?" Mrs. Pike stared. "You can barely stand." "That wasn't my question." Jesse's eyes lifted to hers. Something passed between them then, small as a match flame. He had been judged by women who ran before they knew him. She had been judged by people who looked at her dress, her limp, her empty hands, and decided she was already beaten. Marta pressed one palm to the table and forced herself upright. I came to cook, she said. If this ranch still needs feeding, I'll start with stew. Ruthie stepped out from behind Jesse. Can you make biscuits? Marta looked at the child and saw the wilted flowers still crushed in her fist. I can make biscuits soft enough to forgive a hard day. Ruthie glanced at Jesse as if asking permission to hope. Jesse gave the smallest nod. That evening, while the runaway bride's wagon disappeared into town and Bellwether Crossing prepared another feast of gossip, the injured cook at the Bar John Ranch rolled biscuit dough with shaking hands. Jesse Guthrie carried in kindling without being asked. Ruthie set 3 chip plates at the kitchen table instead of in the dining room, and when the sun lowered red behind the barn, the first warm smell of supper rose through the silent Cowboy Heir's house. By morning, Marta's fever had come. She woke on a narrow cot beside the kitchen stove, under a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. She did not remember lying down. She remembered stirring stew, cutting potatoes, and pretending the pain in her leg was nothing more than a nuisance. She remembered Jesse standing at the pump in the dusk, washing blood from a strip of linen with his ruined hand. She remembered Ruthie eating 2 biscuits and whispering. She didn't leave. After that, the night had broken into pieces. A lamp, a cool cloth, Jesse's shadow crossing the ceiling, Mrs. Pike muttering that no sensible ranch kept an injured stranger when a doctor was 16 miles away. Marta tried to sit up and found Jesse in the chair near the stove. He was asleep with his hat tilted over his eyes, one boot braced against the wood box, his arms crossed as though even rest was something he did on guard. Morning light silvered the scar at his throat. On the table beside him sat a cup of water, a folded clean bandage, and a small tin of salve. Marta stared. Men did not sit up with women like her. Men sat up with beautiful wives, dying mothers or daughters whose names would be carved on family stones. Marta Harper had never belonged to anyone's keeping. Her mother had died when Marta was 16. Her father had followed the railroad west and never returned. Since then, kitchens had been her shelter, wages her protection, and usefulness the only dowry she possessed. She moved her foot. Pain flashed. Jesse woke instantly. He removed his hat and stood. I'm sorry, Marta said. I didn't mean to take your chair. He looked at the cot, then the water, then her bandaged leg. You needed it. 4 words, rough as gravel, precious as bread. The back door opened and Mrs. Pike entered carrying eggs in her apron. She stopped when she saw Jesse awake and Marta watching him. Mr. Guthrie, you have men waiting for orders. Jesse took the water cup and placed it in Marta's hands before turning away. I will cook, Marta said. No, you will not, Mrs. Pike replied. You'll open that wound and have us burying you by Sunday. Marta gripped the cup. If I don't cook, I don't earn. If I don't earn, I don't stay. That is how the world works, ma'am. The housekeeper's face changed, but not with softness. She was a woman shaped by rules, and rules had kept her upright through widowhood, drought, and years inside a house too quiet for comfort. This is not a charity kitchen. I didn't ask for charity. Jesse, who had reached the door, stopped. Marta hated that he was hearing this. She hated that her needs stood bare in the morning light. I can sit at the table and peel potatoes, she said. I can mix dough. I can season beans, keep coffee hot, plan supper, teach the child to wash greens, and tell any man who complains to chew slower. I can work sitting down until I can stand. Ruthie appeared behind Mrs. Pike in her nightdress, hair tangled, eyes still sleepy. I can wash greens, she said. Mrs. Pike sighed. This is nonsense. Jesse looked at Marta, not at her limp, not at the torn edge of her dress, at her. Then he took a pencil from the shelf and wrote on the back of a seed receipt. Wages fair, room by kitchen, work as able, no debt. He said it before Marta. She read it twice. No debt, that mattered. That was how poor women lost choices. That was how kindness turned into a rope. What if I can't do enough? Enough is not measured by standing. Martha swallowed. No one had ever put such a thing in writing for her. Mrs. Pike looked away, suddenly busy with the eggs. That afternoon, Jessie hitched a team to the light wagon and rode into town. Martha learned this from Ruthie, who stood on a chair at the work table, sleeves rolled to her elbows, washing carrots with grave determination. "He is going to fetch Doc Hanley," Ruthie said. "He won't say so, but he is. I told him I couldn't pay a doctor. Uncle Jesse pays for things people need and pretends he did not." Martha smiled faintly. "That sounds expensive." "It makes Mrs. Pike mad. Most good things do." Ruthie considered that with the seriousness of a judge. "Are you going to be his bride?" The carrot slipped from Martha's hand. "No. Why not?" "Because I came to cook. They all came to marry and left. My bae coming to cook works better." Martha looked toward the window. Out beyond the yard, Jesse rode along the fence line, his dark coat moving with the rhythm of the horse. There was no softness in the shape of him from that distance. He looked like a man carved for endurance, not tenderness. "He needs someone finer than me," Martha said. Ruthie frowned. "Finer how?" Martha tried to think of a simple answer. "Beauty, money, family. A woman who did not limp, did not own only 2 dresses, and did not wake up afraid of being turned out. Someone who fits a parlor better than a pantry." Ruthie scrubbed a carrot too hard. "Parlors are cold before supper." Doc Hanley arrived with Jesse. He was a stooped man with silver eyebrows and a saddlebag full of bitter-smelling medicine. He examined Martha's burn while Mrs. Pike hovered, and Ruthie stood outside the pantry door, forbidden to watch, but listening with all her might. "It's angry but not ruin," the doctor said. "She needs rest, clean bandages, no standing over a stove all day." Martha braced herself for dismissal. Jesse stood near the sink, arms folded. Doc Hanley glanced at him. "You hear me, Jesse? If you want this woman cooking roundup meals by next week, you'll lose her leg for her." Jesse's face went still. Martha expected him to write a note, nod, perhaps leave the room. Instead, he said, "Then she rests." The words came out strained, but clear. Doc Hanley blinked as if he had seen a horse climb a ladder. Mrs. Pike's mouth parted. Martha looked down at her hands, suddenly unable to look at Jesse at all. After the doctor left, the first of the ranch hands came in for supper. They washed at the pump and filed into the kitchen, because Martha refused to let food be carried into the formal dining room, while she sat like an invalid. She had made beans with salt pork, biscuits with sorghum, and fried apples soft enough for Ruthie to eat with a spoon. Silas was the first to praise the meal. "Best biscuits since Christmas," he said. A larger hand named Dobbs laughed. "Careful, Miss Harper. Praise a man's stomach once and he'll follow you like a dog." Martha lifted an eyebrow. "Then I'll keep a broom handy." The men smiled, but it was Jesse's reaction she noticed. Not laughter. Not quite. A change around the eyes, as if a window had opened in a locked house. Later, when the men had gone and Ruthie slept, Martha found Jesse on the back porch. The night smelled of sage and cooling earth. A lantern burned between them. Moths tapped at the glass. "I won't stay if it causes trouble," Martha said. Jesse looked out toward the dark barn. "Trouble was here before you." His voice scraped on the words, but he did not stop. "People talk. They talk before you," he said. "They will say you took in a ruined cook because no bride would have you." The lantern flame leaned in the wind. Jesse turned his head and met her eyes. "Let them learn something true for once." Martha had no answer to that. For years, she had believed dignity meant never needing rescue. But that night, sitting beside a man who had been abandoned in front of his own gate and still made room for her pain, she began to wonder if dignity might also mean accepting shelter without surrendering her soul. The Bargee Ranch did not become gentle all at once. Mornings still began in cold blue light, with the pump handle biting the hands and horses stamping steam into the air. Men still came in hungry enough to empty a pot before Martha could set down the ladle. Mrs. Pike still inspected every shelf, as if dust were a moral failing. Ruthie still woke from nightmares some nights and stood barefoot in the kitchen doorway until Martha noticed and opened the quilt without a word, and Jessie Guthrie remained mostly silent. But silence changed when a person learned its shapes. Martha learned that Jesse's silence at breakfast meant he was counting weather signs. His silence when a ranch hand boasted meant disapproval. His silence when Ruthie climbed into his lap after supper meant something close to peace. When his fingers tapped twice against his coffee cup, he wanted more, but would not ask while Martha's leg hurt. When he carried wood inside and stacked it close to the stove, he was not being practical only. He was saying, in the language he trusted, that warmth should stay near her. Her leg healed slowly. At first she worked seated, chopping onions, kneading dough, directing Ruthie through small chores, and sending Silas to lift heavy pots under a threat of burned beans. Then she stood for 10 minutes, then 20, then long enough to fry chicken in a skillet while Ruthie read aloud from a primer and stumbled over the word perseverance. That one means staying when staying is hard, Martha said. Ruthie looked up. Like you. Martha kept her eyes on the skillet. Like many people. Like Uncle Jesse. Yes, Martha said softly. Like him too. Jesse had come in quietly and heard. He did not speak, but he removed his hat and stood at the door, a moment longer than necessary. Trust grew in such moments, small and work-worn. Martha mended Jesse's torn cuff because it offended her to see good cloth wasted. He repaired the loose leg of her kitchen chair because he had noticed it wobble whenever she shifted her weight. She learned he took coffee without sugar, except on store mornings. He learned she saved the heel of every bread loaf for Ruthie because the child liked it toasted crisp with butter. One afternoon, Martha discovered him in the smokehouse holding a broken doll. It was a little rag doll with yarn hair and one missing button eye. Jesse held it as carefully as if it were glass. When he noticed Martha at the door, he turned slightly away. I was looking for salt, she said, though the salt barrel stood plain as a preacher on Sunday. Jesse looked at the doll. Ruthie's? He shook his head. The wind pushed at the smokehouse door. Martha waited. Sisters, he said at last. The word cost him. She saw it in his throat. Your sister? He nodded. Martha did not ask more. In a town like Bellwether Crossing, questions were often knives dressed as concern. She only stepped inside, took a clean scrap of black thread from her apron pocket, and held it out. I can fix the eye. Jesse stared at the thread. Then he handed her the doll. His fingers brushed hers. The contact was brief, but it steadied something in her chest and unsettled something deeper. That evening, she placed the mended doll on Ruthie's pillow. The child came to breakfast with red eyes. Where did you find Mama's doll? Martha looked toward Jesse. He was standing by the stove, his face turned away. In the smokehouse, Martha said. Someone kept it safe. Ruthie ran to Jesse and wrapped both arms around his waist. He closed his burned hand gently over her hair. After that, Ruthie followed Martha everywhere. She learned to roll pie crust, though she pressed too hard. She learned that potatoes must be cut evenly or half would turn to mush. She learned to set coffee aside for Jesse before Dobbs drank it all. And she learned that a woman could be poor and still command a kitchen, like a captain commands a ship. The ranch hands learned too. At first, some called Martha the cook, as if she had no Christian name. Jesse corrected that without raising his voice. Miss Harper, he said one evening when Dobbs shouted through the door for more biscuits. Dobbs froze. Jesse did not look up from cleaning his rifle. Her name is Miss Harper. After that, every man used it. News of Martha's place at the bargee reached town by way of the supply wagon. By the time she was strong enough to ride in with Mrs. Pike for church, Bellwether Crossing had already dressed the truth in ribbons of suspicion. People turned when she stepped down from the wagon. She wore her best dress, which was only her brown one brushed clean, with a new hem let down from scraps Mrs. Pike had grudgingly found in a trunk. Her burns still ached beneath the stocking. Ruthie held her hand. Jessie walked behind them, close enough that the town noticed, and far enough that Marthe could pretend not to. Whispers followed. "That's the injured cook. He kept her. My baby. She has no sense to be frightened. My bae. She is after the ranch." Martha kept walking. Martha kept walking. Inside the whitewashed church, the women's pews filled with perfume, feathers, and judgment. Mrs. Bell from the hotel looked Martha over with the satisfaction of someone seeing a former employee seated below her station. "How fortunate," Mrs. Bell said sweetly, "that the Guthrie Ranch has use for damaged goods." Ruthie's hand tightened. Martha felt heat rise in her face. She had scrubbed floors for that woman until her hands cracked. She had risen before dawn to bake bread for travelers who never knew her name. One injury and Mrs. Bell had tossed her out like a chip plate. Before Martha could answer, Jessie stepped past her. The church quieted in layers. He removed his hat. "She is not goods," he said. 3 words. The whole aisle seemed to hold its breath. Jessie's voice was rough, but it reached every pew. "And she is not damaged." Mrs. Bell's smile fell apart. Martha stared at the side of his face. She knew speaking pained him. She had seen him choose silence even when men lied about him. Yet, here he had spent words on her name, her dignity, in front of people who had never once spent mercy on him. Ruthie lifted her chin with fierce pride. They sat together in the Guthrie pew. Martha tried to listen to the sermon, but her heart would not settle. Jessie's shoulder was a warm presence beside her. Between them on the bench lay his hat, dusty from honest work, and Ruthie's small hand rested on its brim. After church, a man in a gray suit waited near the hitching rail. He was handsome in the polished way of a knife. His mustache was neat. His boots were too clean for the street. Caleb Guthrie smiled at Jessie as if they were fond cousins, and not rivals, bound together by a dead man's will. "Well now," Caleb said, his eyes sliding to Martha. "So the rumors are true. The silent heir has stopped ordering brides and started collecting strays." Jessie's face hardened. Martha felt Ruthie move closer. Caleb tipped his hat. "No offense meant, Miss Harper. A woman must eat somehow." Martha had taken insults from better men and worse. But before she could decide which kind Caleb was, Jessie stepped close enough that Caleb's smile tightened. "Speak plain," Jessie said. The words came like stones dropped into a well. Caleb glanced around. People were watching, pretending not to. "Plainly then," he said, "the first frost comes soon. Your father's will did not say you could keep the ranch by hiring a cook to warm your kitchen. It said you must make a respectable household, a wife, a family, stability. If you cannot, the South Range comes to me." Ruthie's face went white. Caleb leaned closer, lowering his voice but not enough. "And no judge in this county will count desperation as a bride." Martha felt the words strike as if aimed at her ribs. Desperation. She had been called plain, poor, stubborn, slow, and unlucky. But desperation was worse because it held a seed of truth. She didn't need shelter. She did need wages. She did need the Barzy more than it needed her. Jessie did not answer. He only placed one hand on Ruthie's shoulder and guided her toward the wagon. But that night, as Martha washed the supper plates, the kitchen no longer felt as safe. Caleb's words moved through it like cold wind under a door. No judge would count desperation as a bride. Martha told herself it did not matter. She was not Jessie Guthrie's bride. Yet when she looked across the room and saw him lifting Ruthie so she could hang a string of dried apples above the stove, her heart gave a quiet, dangerous ache. The truth about Jessie Guthrie came in smoke. Not real smoke at first, but the memory of it. A storm rolled over the prairie 3 nights after church, dragging black clouds across the moon and rattling the kitchen windows. The men had ridden out to secure the horses. Mrs. Pike was asleep upstairs. Ruthie sat at the table with her primer open, pretending not to be afraid of thunder. Martha was stirring milk into cornmeal when lightning struck somewhere beyond the north pasture. The flash turned the kitchen white. Ruthie screamed. Jesse, who had just entered with rain shining on his coat, went rigid. His face emptied in a way Martha had never seen. The cup in his burned hand slipped and shattered on the floor. "Uncle Jesse," Ruthie whispered. He did not seem to hear. Thunder rolled. Ruthie began to cry. Martha left the stove and crossed the kitchen despite the ache in her leg. She did not touch Jesse. Something told her touch would pull him deeper into wherever he had gone. "Mr. Guthrie," she said quietly, "the cup broke. That is all. The house is whole." His eyes moved to her. "The child is safe," Martha said. His breath came hard. "Ruthie is safe." At the sound of her name, Ruthie ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. Jesse shuddered once, then bent over her, his burned hands spreading across her back. Martha knelt with a cloth to gather the broken cup. A sharp piece sliced her finger. She barely felt it. Later, after Ruthie had been settled with Mrs. Pike and the storm had softened to rain, Martha found Jesse in the barn. He was brushing the same horse over and over, long after the animal stood dry and calm. "You don't have to tell me," Martha said from the doorway. His hand stopped. "I mean it," she said. "People have taken enough from you. I won't take your story just because I'm curious." Rain whispered on the roof. Jesse leaned his forehead briefly against the horse's neck. "My brother Thomas," he said. Martha stayed still. The horse breathed. The lantern swung slightly overhead. "Barn burned 8 years ago. Lightning. Not this barn. Old one." His voice rasped until he swallowed. Thomas was inside. So was Ruthie. She was a baby then. Martha felt the shape of the grief before he finished. "I could hear both," Jesse said. Thomas yelling, Ruthie crying. Smoke so thick I couldn't see my hands. He lifted the scarred one. "Found Ruthie first?" He stopped. Martha's throat tightened. "You carried her out?" He nodded once. "Went back for Thomas." Roof came down. The rain filled the silence. "My father said I chose wrong." Martha closed her eyes. There were cruelties so deep they seemed impossible, yet the frontier was full of them. Men blamed the living because the dead could not answer. Families built monuments out of guilt and made the gentlest person kneel beneath them. "Did you?" she asked. Jesse looked at her sharply. "Choose wrong?" His expression changed, almost wounded by the question. Martha stepped into the barn. "You saved a child. Then you tried to save your brother. That is not choosing wrong. That is being forced to make a choice no human heart was made to make." Jesse's jaw worked. My voice burned. Father sat silence, suited a coward. The words were ugly. They did not belong in his mouth. Martha's anger rose so fast it steadied her. "Then your father was wrong." No one moved. Even the horse seemed to wait. Jesse stared at her as if she had struck him, not with cruelty, but with something more dangerous. "Belief. People in town say you burned that barn for inheritance," Martha said. "Caleb lets them say it. Maybe helps them say it. But I've watched you carry hot pans when my hands were full. I've watched you cut Ruthie's meat and pretend she is old enough not to notice. I've watched you leave the last biscuit for a child and a warm chair for a woman who had no right to expect it. You are many things, Jesse Guthrie. Cruel is not one of them." His name hung between them. She had never called him Jesse before. A muscle tightened in his cheek. He looked away, but not before she saw his eyes shine. That was the secret, emotional turning point, though neither of them knew it then. It was not a kiss. It was not a confession. It was one wounded person placing a hand over the oldest lie inside another and saying, "No, this does not belong to you." The next morning, Caleb came to the ranch. He arrived with 2 men from town and a folded paper in his coat pocket. Martha watched from the kitchen window as he dismounted with the confidence of a man who expected doors to open. Jesse met him in the yard. Ruthie stood beside Marta, clutching her mother's repaired doll. I don't like him, Ruthie said. You have good sense. Caleb's voice carried through the open window. I have a bride for you, cousin. Widow, named Mrs. Lennox. Respectable, fertile enough if rumor serves, and willing to overlook your defects for a proper settlement. She will arrive Monday. Marry her before frost, and I might. Let this unpleasant challenge rest. Jessie said nothing. Caleb smiled. Or keep your cook, but do not expect the court to see a limping kitchen girl as the salvation of a Guthrie estate. Marta flinched to spite herself. Ruthie turned. He means you. I know. You are not a kitchen girl. I am exactly a kitchen girl, Marta said, keeping her voice even. There is no shame in it. But he said it mean. Mean words do not make honest work dirty. In the yard, Jessie took the folded paper from Caleb. He read it, then handed it back. No one word. It carried farther than a shout. Caleb's smile thinned. You always were a fool with fire, Jessie. Marta saw Jessie's shoulders change. Caleb leaned closer. I wonder how long before your charity case hears what really happened that night. Jessie did not move. Marta opened the kitchen door and stepped onto the porch. She has heard, she said. Every man in the yard looked at her. The prairie wind pulled at her apron. Her injured leg trembled under her weight, but she stood straight. Caleb's eyes narrowed. This is family business. Then speak like family, not like a snake under the step. Silas, who had been near the barn, coughed into his fist to hide surprise. Jessie turned toward Marta. His expression warned her to be careful, but there was something else beneath it. Fear for her, not of her. Caleb removed his hat slowly. You think yourself important now? No, Marta said. I think myself present. That seems to bother you. Color rose in Caleb's face. He looked at Jessie. You have until Saturday week. After that, I file my claim. And when the South Range is mine, I will remember who stood on which porch. He rode away hard enough to throw dust over the yard. That night, Marta found a torn letter tucked beneath the kitchen door. It was not signed. It said only, leave before he loses everything because of you. Marta folded it once, then again. She did not show Jessie, not because she feared Caleb, because some part of her feared the letter was right. Marta began packing before dawn. She placed her spare dress in her flour sack, then her comb, her mother's old thimble, and the half wages Mrs. Bell had given her. There was very little to gather. A life of being easy to dismiss made for a light bundle. The kitchen was dark, except for the stove glow. She had left bread rising under a cloth, beans soaking for dinner, and a list for Mrs. Pike written in a steady hand. Work should not suffer because a heart had been foolish. She told herself leaving was mercy. Jessie needed a respectable wife to save the ranch. Ruthie needed land, inheritance, and protection from Caleb. The Bargee hands needed wages from a whole estate, not a divided one. Marta Harper, injured cook, poor woman, unwanted stray, had no right to stand between them and survival. She reached for the back door. Jessie stood in the hall. He had not shaved. His shirt was open at the throat, showing the edge of the old scar. In the dim light, he looked less like the silent heir of a vast ranch, and more like a man who had woken from another burning dream. Marta closed her hand around the flour sack. I left instructions for breakfast. I did not ask for breakfast. The words were rough with sleep and feeling. She looked down. You should marry Mrs. Lennox. No, you don't even know her. I know enough. Jessie, Caleb will take the South Range, my bay. That land is Ruthie's future. You are not the price of it. Marta's eyes burned. He stepped closer, slowly, as if she were a frightened horse. Who told you to leave? No one. He looked at the sack. Marta. Her name in his voice nearly undid her. She pulled the note from her pocket and handed it to him. He read it once. His face did not change, but something colder than anger entered the room. Caleb, he said, my bay, Someone else. It doesn't matter. It matters. It doesn't. If the words are true. He looked up. Marta forced herself to speak before courage failed. I have been a burden since the day I arrived. You paid the doctor. You gave me a room. You defended me in church. Ruthie follows me as if I know anything about keeping a heart safe. And now people say your ranch my split because you let me stay. People lie. Not always. Her voice broke despite her effort. I am poor, Jesse. I am plain. I am too old to pretend some man will look at me and forget the prettier women who passed by first. I have no family to stand behind me, and no dowry to place in your hand. I limp when I'm tired. I own nothing but work. If you choose me, they will say you settled for the only woman too desperate to run. Jessie took one more step. Did you run? The question silenced her. Outside, the first gray of morning touched the window. No, she whispered. Then you are braver than every fine woman they sent me. Marta shook her head. Tears slipping free. Bravery is not enough to save land. No. His burned hand tightened around the note. But truth might. Before she could ask what he meant, a shout came from the yard. Fire! The word tore through the house like a gunshot. Jessie ran. Marta dropped the sack and followed as fast as her leg allowed. The eastern sky was pale, but the barnyard glowed orange. Smoke poured from the feed shed attached to the old tack room. Horses screamed from the corral beyond it, wild with fear. Men rushed from the bunkhouse half-dressed, hauling buckets, shouting over one another. Then Marta heard Ruthie. Not outside, inside the smoke. My doll, Uncle Jesse. Jesse froze for less than a breath. But Marta saw the old fire seize him. The past had reached out of the dark and caught him by the throat. Smoke, child, flame. Impossible choice. Marta did not think. She snatched a wet horse blanket from the trough, threw it over her shoulders and ran toward the tack room. Someone shouted her name. Heat struck her face. Smoke clawed her lungs. Her legs screamed under her, but she pressed on, one hand against the wall, following Ruthie's coughs. She found the child crouched beneath a saddle rack, clutching the rag doll. A fallen beam blocked half the doorway behind her. Flames ate at the far wall where lamp oil had spilled, in a shining trail too neat to be accident. Marta wrapped a blanket around Ruthie. Hold tight to me. I'm sorry. Ruthie sobbed. I wanted Mama's doll. I know. Breathe into my apron. Marta lifted her. Pain burst, white, up her injured leg. She staggered, caught herself on the saddle rack, and turned toward the door. Smoke thickened. For one terrifying moment, she could not see the way out. Then Jesse's voice came from the fire. Marta. It was not a whisper, not a broken scrape, but a raw cry pulled from the deepest part of him. Marta, answer me. Here, she choked. Jesse appeared through the smoke with a wet cloth tied over his mouth. His burned hand blackened with soot. He took Ruthie from Marta, but Marta pushed him back when he reached for her. The wall, she coughed. Oil trail, not lightning. His eyes met hers. He understood. A beam cracked overhead. Jesse shoved Ruthie through the opening to Silas, then turned and caught Marta, just as her leg failed. This time she had no pride left to refuse. He lifted her in both arms and carried her. Through smoke, flame, and falling sparks, they burst into morning air. Men dragged them clear. Ruthie screamed for Marta. Mrs. Pike sobbed openly for the first time anyone could remember. Jesse knelt in the dirt with Marta against him, one arm locked around her shoulders as if the world might try to take her again. Her lungs burned. Her dress was scorched. Her bandage had torn open, but Ruthie was alive. The feed shed collapsed inward with a roar. As the men fought the last of the flames, Silas came running from behind the tack room with something in his hand. Mr. Guthrie, he said, breathless, found this near the oil cans. It was a silver match case. Jesse took it. The initials on the lid were clear, even through soot. C.G. Caleb Guthrie. By noon, half the town had gathered at the bargee fire. Drew people faster than church bells, and Accusation faster than fire. Caleb arrived last, dressed too cleanly, face arranged in concern. "What a tragedy," he said, "and how fortunate the damage is limited, though I wonder how it started." Jesse stood in the yard, smoke-stained and silent. Marta sat on a chair near the porch, Ruthie pressed against her side. Doc Hanley had bandaged her leg again and ordered her not to move. No one listened less than Marta, but for once she had no strength to argue. Sheriff Amos Creed held the silver match case. Caleb laughed when he saw it. "You think that proves something? Half the county knows that case was stolen from me weeks ago." Marta looked at him. "That is why you left it," she said. All eyes turned. Caleb's smile flickered. "Pardon? You left something that pointed to you because you wanted to claim it had been stolen. You wanted everyone to think Jesse set the fire and blamed you poorly. But you made one mistake." Caleb's eyes hardened. Marta gripped the chair arms and stood. Jesse moved toward her, but she lifted one hand. This was her pride to risk. Her name, her word, her place. The lamp oil trail began inside the tack room and ran outward. She said, "I saw it when I went for Ruthie. A man trying to save his own barn does not pour oil from the inside and trap a child by accident." Caleb scoffed. "You were half dead from smoke. I was alive enough to see." Mrs. Pike stepped forward, and I saw Mr. Caleb near the shed before dawn. I thought he had come early to speak with Mr. Jesse. I did not mention it, because I did not know a man could be wicked enough to burn a child for land. The crowd shifted. Caleb's polished confidence cracked. Sheriff Creed's hand moved toward his holster. Caleb backed one step. "This is madness. You would take the word of a hired cook." Jesse moved then. He walked to Marta's side, slowly, and in full view of everyone. Soot marked his face. His throat must have been raw from smoke and shouting. Yet, when he spoke, his voice carried to the fence line. "I would take Marta Harper's word over any man's in this county." Marta closed her eyes. A murmur went through the crowd. Gallup pointed at him. "You'll lose the land for this. You hear me? The will requires a household, not a scandal. No court will hand the South Range to a scarred mute plain savior, to a woman no one else wanted." Jesse's face changed. Not with rage, with decision. He turned toward the townspeople who had watched 3 brides run, who had swallowed every rumor Caleb fed them, who had judged Marta's limp and Jesse's silence, and called both proof of unworthiness. "I saved Ruthie from the fire 8 years ago," Jesse said. "I went back for Thomas. I failed. That failure is mine to grieve, not Caleb's to sell." The yard fell utterly still. "My father blamed me. I let him. I was tired." He swallowed, and Marta saw pain ripple through him. "But I did not burn that barn. I did not burn this one. And I will not marry a stranger to satisfy men who think land matters more than truth." Ruthie began to cry silently. Jesse looked at Marta. "This woman stayed when staying cost her. She fed my men, cared for my child, defended my name, and walked into fire for my family." His voice roughened. "If the law says she is not respectable, then the law has never seen respect." Marta could not breathe for a reason smoke had not caused. Jesse took off his hat before the whole town, before Caleb, before the hands, before the house that had watched women run from him. He asked Marta Harper, "Will you let me court you proper? If you can forgive how late I am in asking." It was not a rushed proposal made from danger. It was better. It was a public choosing. Marta's tears came freely now. "I'm not fine," she whispered. Jesse stepped closer. "You are true." That was enough to break the last locked door inside her. "Yes," she said, "you might court me proper." Ruthie threw her arms around Marta's waist, careful of the bandages, and the barge yard filled not with laughter or gossip, but with something Marta had never expected to hear for herself. Approval. Caleb Guthrie left Bellwether Crossing in handcuffs before sunset. Not because the town had suddenly become wise, but because Mrs. Pike remembered seeing him near the shed. Silas found his horse's track behind the tack room, and Sheriff Creed discovered an oil rack tucked beneath Caleb's saddle. Wickedness often counted on silence. That day, too many people spoke. The court matter over the South Range did not end in an hour, as dime novels might have preferred. There were papers, hearings, testimony, and men in stiff collars who cared more for signatures than sacrifice. But Caleb's claim weakened under the weight of his own crime, and Jesse's father's will, once read in full, proved less cruel than Caleb had claimed. It required Jesse to maintain a household for Ruthie's welfare. It did not require him to purchase a wife like livestock before frost. Doc Hanley testified that the bargee was the safest home Ruthie had. Mrs. Pike testified that Martha Harper had made the kitchen, and therefore the house, livable again. Silas testified that no ranch hand had eaten so well or behaved so politely in years. When the judge asked Ruthie where she wished to live, she stood in a dress Martha had mended and said, "With Uncle Jesse and Miss Harper, because they both come when I call." That settled more than law. Autumn deepened. Cottonwoods turned gold along the creek. The wind sharpened. The men repaired the burned tack room, and Jesse built a new shelf in the kitchen, lower than the old one, so Martha would not have to reach and risk another fall. She pretended not to notice. He pretended not to watch her notice. Courting on a ranch was not made of moonlit dances and poetry. It was Jesse bringing Martha a shawl from town because the kitchen grew cold before dawn. It was Martha setting aside the tenderest piece of roast because Jesse's throat hurt on dry days. It was walking together to the smokehouse while Ruthie ran ahead with the repaired doll. It was Jesse asking questions with his eyes and Martha answering without fear. It was the first time he laughed, truly laughed, when she told Dobbs that if he tracked mud across her scrubbed floor again, she would season the next stew with his boot leather. The laugh startled everyone, Jesse most of all. Afterward, he stood very still, one hand at his throat. Martha touched his sleeve. "That sound suited you," she said. His eyes warmed. "So do you," he answered. The words were not smooth. They did not need to be. By the time the first frost silvered the pasture grass, Jesse Guthrie had come into town beside Martha Harper every Sunday for 6 weeks. People still watched them, but the watching changed. Mrs. Bell no longer called Martha damaged goods. She did not call her much of anything, which Martha considered a kindness from the Lord. Sheriff Creed tipped his hat. Doc Hanley asked after her leg. Women who had whispered now asked for biscuit advice and pretended they had always believed Jesse misunderstood. Martha did not hate them. He took room, and her life had finally filled with better things. One Sunday after service, Jesse asked her to walk with him behind the church, where prairie grass grew against the fence, and the sound of congregation voices softened into a distant hum. Ruthie watched from the steps with Mrs. Pike, both of them pretending not to watch at all. Jesse held his hat in both hands. Martha smiled. "You look like a man about to face a firing squad." "Worse," he said. "A question." Her heart began to pound. He looked toward the open prairie. "I have been silent most of my life, because silence asked little of me. Words could be twisted. Silence could not." Martha waited. "Then you came and heard what I did not say." He turned back to her. "You made Ruthie feel chosen. You made my house warm. You stood before fire and Caleb and every cruel tongue in town. I thought I needed a bride to keep land. I was wrong." The church bell rope creaked in the wind. Jesse stepped closer. "I need a wife because I love you. Land or no land. Fine house or no fine house. If all I had was a one-room cabin and a stove that smoked, I would ask the same." His voice roughened, but he did not look away. "Martha Harper, will you marry me?" For a moment, all the old voices rose. Too poor, too plain, too late, too broken, too unwanted. Then Marta looked at the man before her, scarred and steady, silent, no longer where it mattered. She thought of his hands washing her bandages, his voice defending her name, his arms carrying her from smoke, his patience when she feared kindness, his truth offered not as a bargain, but as a home. "Yes," she said. Jesse closed his eyes. It was the first time she saw relief overcome him completely. He did not kiss her there, behind the church with half the town peeking around bonnets and hymnals. He only took her hand and held it, as if it were a vow already spoken. They married in December. Snow did not come, but frost lay white on the church roof and made the whole town seem washed clean. Marta wore a cream dress sewn by Mrs. Pike from fabric Jesse had ordered months before, but had been too shy to give her. Ruthie stood beside her with the blue ribbon in her hair, the same ribbon Jesse had picked from the dust the day the third bride ran. Silas and Dobbs argued over who polished the wagon better. Doc Hanley cried and denied it. Sheriff Creed kept watch at the door out of habit. Though no danger came, Mrs. Bell attended and brought a cake. It leaned to one side. Marta praised it anyway. When the preacher asked who gave the bride, no father stepped forward. No brother, no uncle, no respectable family name. For one breath, Marta felt the old emptiness open. Then Ruthie took her hand. "I do," the child said. The church softened. Jesse's eyes filled. The vows were simple. Marta promised faith, labor, truth, and tenderness. Jesse promised shelter, honor, patience, and a voice when silence would wound her. When he placed the ring on her finger, his burned hand trembled. Marta steadied it with both of hers. After the wedding, they returned to the bargee in a wagon trimmed with pine boughs. No bride ran from the ranch that day. No veil snagged on the mesquite. No gossip followed except the harmless kind about how fine the biscuits were and whether Dobbs had eaten 7 or 8. At the gate, Jesse stopped the wagon. Marta looked at him. "Something wrong?" He shook his head. Ruthie leaned between them. "Why are we stopping?" Jesse looked toward the house, the barn, the new tack room, the windmill turning slow against the winter sky. Then he looked at Marta. "Wanted you to see it," he said. "See what?" "Home. Before you entered as my wife." Marta's throat tightened. The ranch no longer seemed cold. Smoke rose from the chimney in a clean blue line. Lanterns glowed in the kitchen windows, though afternoon had not yet faded. The yard was swept. The porch rail had been repaired. On the back steps, Mrs. Pike stood pretending she had not arranged evergreen over the door. The men waited near the barn, hats in hand. Everything that had once watched women flee now stood ready to welcome one who had stayed. Jesse climbed down first and came around to Marta's side. He offered his hand. She took it. Her legs still ached in cold weather. It likely always would. She stepped carefully from the wagon, not as a burden, not as a stray, not as the injured cook no one else wanted, but as Marta Guthrie of the Bargee Ranch, wife, keeper of the kitchen warmth, defender of a good man's name, and chosen mother of a child who had learned that staying could be love. Ruthie ran ahead and threw open the front door. "Come in," she called. "Come in before supper gets cold." Marta laughed through tears. Jesse squeezed her hand. Together they crossed the yard where 3 brides had once fled in dust and shame. The mesquite by the gate still held a scrap of old white veil, weathered thin by sun and wind. Jesse reached up to remove it, but Marta stopped him. "Leave it," she said. He looked at her in question. Marta smiled toward the warm kitchen windows. "Let it remind folks that running was not the end of the story." Jesse's face softened. "And staying." She leaned into his side as prairie wind moved over the land and the house opened bright before them. Staying was where love began. That evening, the Bargee kitchen filled with voices, lamplight, and the smell of fresh bread. Ruthie fell asleep with her head in Marta's lap. Mrs. Pike scolded the men for tracking in mud and smiled when no one looked. Jesse sat at the table across from his wife, his scarred hand wrapped around a coffee cup. his silence peaceful at last. Outside, frost silvered the gate, the barn roof, and the torn veil trembling on the mesquite thorn. Inside, the injured cook who had refused to leave had finally come home.